Right, next tonight, new laws are being proposed to break the long-running strike action on our transport network. The government's proposing a minimum service level of 40% to ensure rail and tube services continue even when there are walkouts. Well, our political correspondent Simon Harris has been following this and joins us now. But Simon, what difference will this make exactly?
Well, Charlene, the government has been threatening or promising, depending on your point of view, to do this for some time. And now it seems ministers are going to press ahead with new laws to try to break the stranglehold of the transport unions over the rail and tube networks. It's called minimum service levels. And what it means is that even if there is a strike, some staff will be forced to work to make sure that at least 40% of the trains are still running. This is what the Transport Secretary had to say a short time ago.
It's about making sure that the people that run rail services can issue what are called work notices to set out that certain people have to work to enable them to deliver a minimum service level. We've consulted on that in detail before we wrote these regulations. We're now laying the regulations before Parliament. Parliament will then take a view on them and they'll become law ahead of Christmas.
Not surprisingly, there's been a very angry reaction from the transport unions. Mick Lynch, the General Secretary of the RMT, one of the biggest unions, called the new laws an authoritarian attack on the fundamental freedoms of working people. And he said that any train company or TfL which tried to use the new laws to break a strike would find itself involved in yet another dispute. Now, there aren't any strikes planned at the moment, but there are long-running disputes on both the railways and the underground, so these new laws could be tested quite soon. All
right, Simon, thanks very much. The Met Police says it hasn't ruled out asking the Home Secretary to ban this weekend's planned march by pro-Palestinian supporters in central London. The force said it was planning a significant security operation involving thousands of officers. It comes after a similar operation to protect the King's Speech, as our political correspondent Simon Harris reports.
For London's late autumn tourists, it was the stuff of fairy tales, a glimpse of a king and queen in a horse-drawn coach. But for police chiefs, it was one more headache in a challenging week. Today's huge operation came just days after the latest pro-Palestinian demonstration and ahead of another planned for Saturday. The Met is being stretched. Around 1,300 police were on duty for last Saturday's protest. Next weekend's policing operation will be even bigger. The Met is putting the number of officers involved in the thousands. As well as the Armistice Day protest on Saturday, there's Sunday's Remembrance Day parade. Last night, Deputy Assistant Commissioner Adi Adelakan had this message for the protest organisers. Please, we ask you to urgently reconsider.
I have to agree with the Metropolitan Police's view. I think we are a tolerant society and we need to make sure that we have the right of free speech. But on this particular weekend, it's very unique for our country. It's a time for reflection.
There should be the room for people to be able to protest. After all, on Armistice Day, there's 9 football matches taking place in London. There's all sorts of other public events that will be going on. It seems to me, why should we be singled out as somehow taking police resources?
Recent marches and sit-down protests at mainline stations have added to the anxiety felt by many Jewish Londoners. In his speech, the King said the government would confront anti-Semitism and remember the Holocaust.
My government is committed to tackling anti-Semitism and ensuring that the Holocaust is never forgotten. A bill will progress the construction of a National Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre in Victoria Tower Gardens.
In Parliament Square, anti-royalists made their presence felt, but there was no disruption to the royal procession and the tourists got their pictures.
We saw him in his carriage. I wasn't expecting that at all. It was amazing. Lots of guards as well. So very, very impressive.
So excited to see him waving. I've never seen it before. So only on TV, and now I saw it myself. It's amazing.
Just a few hundred yards away, they were still scrubbing off the red paint at the Foreign Office after a protest last Thursday. Simon Harris, ITV News, Westminster.
Next tonight, the government has indicated that there might be light at the end of the tunnel for HS2. In London, at least, after the project was scrapped in the north of the country, ministers said the line from Old Oak Common to Euston could be saved if private investors funded the project. Well, tonight, the Department for Transport says it has had extensive interest. But despite that glimmer of hope, doubts and confusion remain. Here's our political correspondent, Simon Harris.
It wasn't meant to be, but in less than a decade, Old Oak Common will be London's newest mainline railway terminus. Right now, it's a huge hole in the ground. This is where the new high-speed line from Birmingham will stop until the final leg to Euston is ready. When that is a question no one can answer.
We are building here and designing here a terminus that could exist whilst Euston is solved as a funding issue, as a delivery issue.
And you don't know when that will be?
It's for others to decide what they want to do in terms of timeframes. What we are saying here is we will be ready to open here on time between 2029 and 2033.
When the government scrapped the HS2 extension to Manchester, it also pulled the plug on taxpayer funding for the new station at Euston. Instead, it wants private investors to bankroll the project. But before any train reaches Euston, a 4.5-mile tunnel from Old Oak Common needs to be built. Although the tunnelling machines costing £40 million have been ordered and will arrive next year, the government hasn't yet confirmed who's going to pay for the tunnel to be built. Will it be taxpayers' cash, or will the private sector be expected to foot the bill? Business leaders in London are so concerned about the uncertainty over the Euston Tunnel and the prospect of further delays, they've written to the Transport Secretary.
The critical issue around the delivery of Euston Station for HS2 is that we build the tunnel between Old Oak Common and Euston in a way that is at the lowest cost practicable. And that means getting the contract in place to do it now.
A spokesperson for Sadiq Khan described the government's approach to building the line from Old Oak Common to Euston as verging on fantasy. But the Department for Transport said there is already extensive support and interest from the private sector to invest. Below ground, construction bosses are trying to be positive about finishing the job.
Tunnelling to Euston will begin in early 2026.
I'm absolutely certain about that.
Well, we know there's lots of discussions going on within government with regard to funding of the programme as a whole. And we recognise that actually if we can bring private investment into these kind of schemes, that's a great place to find actually a more cost-effective way to deliver them for the taxpayer.
The cost of building the railway from London to Birmingham is officially around £45 billion. But that figure is about to be revised. No one expects it to go down. Simon Harris, ITV News, Old Oak Common.